Okay, it's about 7:07 p.m. Today is Wednesday, March the 9th, 2022. Welcome to week number five of Introduction to Business Law. And I'm Professor Richard Wright, and I will be instructor for this next 2 more weeks, right? So course will end next week. So let's go ahead and get started here. Let me share my screen with you. Here it is. Okay. Let's take a look at the calendar. And let's look at the month view. You see this? This is where we are. Now, what I need to do is to, oh, wow, is I need to, okay, I'll take a look at that. Okay, so the last lecture will be next Wednesday at 7 o'clock p.m. And I know that that's short a week, but I have no other choice with the way the schedule is operating. But this week, your initial post, and what I'm going to do today is I'm going to comment a little bit about week 6 as well, and so you'll give you a head start anyway. So the live lecture right now, your initial post was due yesterday. Your reply post was due Saturday. And then your written assignment and live lecture are due the 13th. Okay. So just remember, next week, the course ends on the 18th, not the 19th. All right. Let's go back. And let's look at the announcement for week 5. So you should be aware that this week we're going to talk about the topics of property, real, personal, and intellectual. Okay. And chapters 4, 6, 23, and 24 of the textbook, along with the PowerPoints that I sent, we're going to discuss personal property, real property, and intellectual property. Okay. So we're going to conclude with intellectual property. And that the discussion post is property law. Note that the initial post again was due yesterday and the reply post Saturday. And then your written assignment concerning eminent domain, which we'll discuss as well. Pay close attention to the rubrics again. All right. So let's look at the module. Okay, so let's look at the discussion for property law. So you're dealing with this scenario. And so your initial post, choose a story or news article that relate to real property, personal property, or intellectual property laws. Then respond to at least one student's post. All right. And I have responded to a couple of them already. And like Kayla, she's got a pretty good post here. And she's got a good explanation. I was looking at this earlier. So this is excellent. And she talks about the power of eminent domain. Um, and the key issue generally in that is whether or not the person was compensated properly. There are other instances where people feel so attached to the property because you should be aware of the fact that land is very unique. There's no other land like the land. I don't care if you build a house on it just like it, it's still not the same. So, but we'll discuss that in just a few minutes. So get that done. And then eminent domain, again, let's look at the written assignment. And here's the scenario. Locate an example of eminent domain. Prepare a 2 to 3 page. Your paper should be APA. Do you hear me? Citations in the body. I refer you again to the academic integrity video that is listed in your um, announcements page. Citations in the body and references at the end. So when it says provide a summary of what happened, it's still going to be APA. So you're going to write it in a form, paragraphs properly, spelling, and then you're going to answer these questions for each of these bullet points. It says, it reminds you in the assignment, proper grammar, spelling, punctuation, and APA. See what it says? In-text citations and references. So not only is it in the rubric, but it's in the module as well. And that it should be, okay, is this assignment going to be allowed to be used? Save your assignment as a PowerPoint. Okay, all right. This one says you can do it as a PowerPoint. All right. But please make sure that you satisfy the requirements of APA. Okay, you will be graded on that. All right, so a PowerPoint, not a PDF, and not as a Word document. All right, that's the instructions. There it is right there. So let's look at the rubric. So remember, if you have limited summary, which means no citations, you're going to be limited. Limited, not just references. It's going to be limited. If you have just a few, you're going to have, and basic information, you're going to end up over here. The point of the matter is you want to end up over here. Thorough and detailed summary. Make sure that you have your sources cited. I know I sound like a broken record, but I keep saying that because sometimes people don't get it. Thorough and detailed explanation of the fairness. Once again, citing the sources that you utilize to accomplish this. Thorough and detailed. And then there it is right there with the APA spelling and so forth. All right. So the point of the matter is that you cannot get this without APA satisfaction and the correct number of pages, by the way. All right. All right. Now let's take a look. Any questions? Excuse me. Feel free to reach out to me. All right. Make sure that you do this properly with a cover page, reference page. All right. Then your live classroom recording. So we're going to talk about the 3 forms of property. All property is either going to fall under one of these 3. So let's start with personal property. So what is personal property? Movable property. Movable property. Property that can be moved. Interest less than complete ownership in land or rights to money. Typical examples would be something as large as a pen, small as a pen, to a car. Is a house personal property? No. Someone asked the question about trailer homes. We'll deal with that too before this is over. Personal property, though, is not necessarily specific to a location. Bags, cell phones, jackets, something that's tangible. Um, and remember, it's movable property, movable property. Um, this, as I said, this pen is an example. These glasses, this shirt I got on, these headphones, my computer. And so property can be, personal property can be purchased a number of ways, as you know already: cash, credit card, checks. One can obtain a personal property as a gift, or you can make it as a donation, or receive it as a donation, or as a beneficiary, okay, in a will or something like that. So let's talk about lost or abandoned property. Remember, we're talking about personal property. Remember, the key factor in personal property is that it's movable property, movable property, movable property. So let's talk about what's the difference between lost, mislaid, and abandoned. So when it's lost, it's accidentally misplaced. Accidentally misplaced. So the owner didn't do it on purpose. That's lost property. You're familiar with that, I'm sure. Very simple. Mislaid property is different from lost. An article has been knowingly placed and then you forgot it where you put it. Now some might say, well, that's lost. For purposes of understanding the concepts here, make sure that lost is accidentally misplaced. Mislaid is put that. That's what you look at it like that. Very simple. Don't get too, and that's it. It's really simple. An abandoned property is an article that's been purposely distanced with the intent, without the intent of getting it back. What's one of the most common places that people have abandoned property? Is throwing it in the garbage can. Okay, throwing it in the garbage can, throwing it on the ground, throwing it away. So you don't want to get too heavily into it. All right, without the intent of retrieval. Um, let's say people have something in their front yard, like a dresser or something like that, which you've commonly seen, and there's a sign on it, and it says free. What that usually means is that it's abandoned and the person can take it. You see signs that says free wood in the yard and things of that nature. Okay. So now, is an animal personal property? It could be. Although comprised of different criteria, lost, mislaid, and abandoned property are all regarded with protection and deference to the ownership under the law. So who owns it? Courts don't presume that property is readily severed from its true and rightful owner, and then goods can be claimed by others. Steps are often required to obtain legal title or access to these vehicles, these items, such as, like, for example, you have that situation where a person has a car, and they want to sell you the car, they will generally give you the title so that you can have it secured. All right. So that's it for personal property. Remember, the key thing is that when it's personal property, it's movable property. Movable. So ask yourself, is this item movable? I don't care how heavy it is, but is it movable? A car is pretty heavy, but it's personal property. All right. Now let's talk about real property. Now, remember real property. Real property consists of the land, the buildings attached to it, and forests and undeveloped land that can be possessed, such as a lot of people don't realize this, the minerals like the oil or something valuable under the land. Remember when we talked about my legs at the beginning of this course? And it must be, hear me, to be enforceable in writing. Okay. And so you purchase it, and states have different laws. But one thing, few things are in common. For example, the typical scenario, as it says here, is with the purchase of a home, you have a buyer, a seller, and an agent working on behalf of the parties. The agents negotiate for their clients a price. At the closing, all the documents are signed and money is exchanged. And then title will pass from the seller to the owner by a deed. And then the deed is recorded so that the public can see the change in ownership. Okay. That's how the purchase of real estate takes place. That's how the purchase of real estate takes place. All right. Another means of acquiring real estate is by inheritance. You can inherit it by a will, and the recipient will possibly have some costs that go with that, such as taxes, the mortgage associated with the property, and in order to properly own the property, you have to make sure you take care of the costs. It is not a legal requirement to have a will because if the person dies without a will, we call that intestate. And what that means is that the jurisdiction in which the property is located under the laws of that state have statutes for what we call intestate succession. And in the probate court, it will be distributed based upon the law in that state. So an example is if there is no will and a person dies and they are married, their property goes to that spouse. However, generally in that instance, it goes to the spouse, but then half of it goes to the children, if there are children. If there are children, okay? So, and then if one of the children died and they have children, so it would go to their portion would go. So let me give you an example of what I mean. So a person dies owning real estate without a will, and it goes through probate. Then at the end, by the way, the judge will issue a deed. So, but here's how it would break down. So the surviving spouse, and then the individuals would divide that property one half to the children. So let's say there's 4 children. So their half would be divided in fourths. But let's say that that person died and they had 2 kids. So their fourth would be divided in half to be basically an eighth between them. So the fourth would be divided in half. And it goes down like that. And now, one thing you should be aware is that this is not the maximum way. Now, if property is inherited through a will or without a will, this is how it would go. Now, if there are no relatives, then the property does what we call escheats. It's a legal term, which means it passes to the state, and the state becomes the owner of that property. As simple as that. So what is the best advice? Prepare a will. But we lawyers, you tell people it is depending on how you set the title up on the property. For example, one of the common ways of avoiding this issue, even without a will, is by um, having the property distributed by what we call, is for husband and wife, tenant in the entirety, or or tenants in the entirety. Okay. If it's tenant in the entirety, then the husband dies, the wife becomes the sole owner, and vice versa, the surviving spouse. If it's in what we call joint tenancy without tenants by the entirety, which applies to anybody, it doesn't have to be a husband and wife, but then the survivor of that estate becomes the owner of that. Okay. And that's how it works there. So the way that but if you have what we call tenants in common in the deed, then in that case, the property would go uh, according to the way I said a few minutes ago. Um, the surviving tenant would receive half of it, and then the rest of it would go almost like the way it was intestate. Okay. So if they have children, all right, very simple. Adverse possession. So what is adverse possession? It's adverse means it means under duress or strain. Although not necessarily a common way to obtain property, one should be aware of adverse possession. And the way that here's okay, I'll give you an acronym that we learned when I took the bar, just like my legs. It's called, and I came up with this one myself. It's cone, which means the person must be in continuous, open, so it's known, notorious, which means that they are actually demonstrating to people that that is their property, and is exclusive. Okay, so some refer to this as squatters' rights. So let's say you allow someone to be on the property and they cone for 20 years. That's what we typically said. But some states, it goes less than that. So in order for someone to claim the land, the following elements must be satisfied. The person who possesses it must be in actual possession. Okay. The possession must be open, as I said, and notorious and visible to others. That's what it means. It's visible to others. So there's that open and notorious. It must be hostile, which means it goes against the interests of the owners. And then the possession must be continuous for whatever the statutory period there. All right. It must be exclusively done by that squatter. But to summarize it, continuous, open, notorious, and exclusive. You said hostile's not in there, but what it means is that the whole thing of adverse possession is it goes against the owner's interest. All right. The exchange of real property for business is not easy to see. For example, here's an example. This is a good one to close with. An organization hoping to develop a brick and mortar location needs to be informed not only about the contract laws. In other words, there's a contract for sale written And as I said, by the statute of frauds, based on the land, L for legs, must be in writing, but also about any possible rights to the land. If a private party has an interest in the selected areas, or alleges some competing form of it, knowledge of real property laws and regulations may prove to be helpful, but that can be a messy piece of litigation. All right. So you got all three. You got purchase, which is the traditional way, inheritance by will or either intestate succession, and then adverse, where a person is almost like allowed it. They just allowed the continuous, open, notorious, exclusive possession of the land to be by someone other than themselves. And that's it for real estate. Intellectual property. Here we go. So we get into intellectual property laws. Now, one of the things that you should be aware is that there are lawyers who are called patent and trademark lawyers, and they specialize in that. Now, I will talk about that in just a few minutes. And usually, if you're searching for an intellectual attorney, they protect your inventions and things of that nature, your patents, uh, trade secrets, trademarks, and copyrights. So let's go through each of these one at a time. So what is a patent? A patent is very unique, and it roughly lasts for 14 to 20 years, depending on the type of patent. For example, utility and plant patents, which cover newly invented machines and newly invented plants, last for 20 years, while design patents, which cover articles to be manufactured, last for only 14 years. The whole concept of patent law is to protect someone from coming up with a unique idea so that they can make money on it. However, they're within a certain time frame, the protection would end. And what you do is you renew it. You renew your patent. Now, let me give you an example of what happened with a client of mine. A young, he wasn't young, he was my dentist, actually. He was my dentist at that time. Came to my law office, and he had this idea, and he had this prototype that he had developed. He had made an example showing me of a toothbrush, and in the toothbrush, if you slid it, the toothpaste would slide up in the toothbrush, and it was disposable. So you use it, brush your teeth, and it had the toothpaste in, so you don't have to have a tube of toothpaste and the toothbrush. And he had this, and I said, "Wow, doctor, this is really nice." I said, "But I recommend that I hook you up with a patent attorney," which was going to be kind of expensive. And I highly recommended it to him. I said, as your counsel, I says, these are specific attorneys that do just that. So I told him, I would give him some names, and I gave him some names, and I did some, he asked me if I would shop around for him, and I got prices, and I came back with the lowest ones. And he said even the lowest ones were too expensive for him. So I said, "So what are you going to do?" So he says, I'll think about what I'm going to do." So some time passed, and I don't know how long. He ended up calling my office, set up appointments, saying he needed to come in to see me. So he comes in and he sees me, and he has this magazine in his hand. It was like a Carol Wright magazine. One of those, you know how you get those whatnots and things that you can order different things, um, little specialty items. So Carol Wright is the name of the company, one of the companies. So it wasn't necessarily Carol Wright, but I don't remember which one. So he put this magazine and he opens it up, and I said, "Oh wow, this is nice." I said, "That's your item, right?" He says, no, that's their item. I said, what happened? He said, well, I ran across an organization that said that they could take care of this for me. I said, were they attorneys? He said, no. Immediately, I said, started shaking my head. I said, so I know what you did. You ended up allowing them to take care of your item, but you probably signed a document. And he showed me what he signed, and in the small print, it actually said that he had actually given them title to the property. And so what they did was they then got a patent attorney and then marketed it and sold it and got millions. I think that the most expensive attorney that he had to have paid was at that time uh, uh, the 20 or 30,000. The one that was cheapest was 10, but he didn't want to do that. So it cost him. So patents are very, very, very important. And you've seen items that have on them. You've seen it on the document itself. You might see it on the bottom or on the side or something, and it says patent pending. That means that the person has applied to the U.S. Patent Office, and you can, and so then while it was in the process, and then it become perfected, and it lasts for the number of years I said. But that's how that's if you do an invention, that's what you want to do. So now let's talk about trade secrets. Like for example, McDonald's has the secret sauce for um, Big Macs. Now everybody knows what that secret sauce is. Everybody knows what it is. Okay. So anyway, the fact of the matter is that like the tartar sauce has a certain formula. Uh, Kentucky Fried Chicken had a formula for how they fix their chicken. Um, so various companies have what we call trade secrets, so they can have their items made unique and not available to the public. And so when you work for these companies, you sign documents saying that you will not reveal this trade secret um, um, and indefinitely. But the key is that the idea must remain secret or it becomes fair game for the public. The laws relating to trade secrets come from what we call the Uniform Trade Secrets Act, which has been adopted by most states, and it protects instead of federal protection, so the laws can vary on the jurisdictions. So your secrets for that you want to be maintained, a method that you utilize to be able uh, uh, to make that. So, and that's what you have to do for trade secrets. Trademarks, you protect how a product is marked or labeled. Usually you'll see that in the form of a C with a circle or R, which means registered, and it's protected. Like for example, if you see the golden arches, generally if you look at the golden arches of McDonald's, you will see the little trademark symbol next to it. I worked for a big law firm, and we represented McDonald's and Mr. Kroc, who I got to know personally. And there were many attempts at violating the trademark, like the burgers, the Big Mac, and you know those kind of things. The Whopper for Burger King, and you have various things. So they must be protected by properly uh, using them in the public. And the federal government offers protection under the Lanham Act, but most states offer also their version as well. And so anyway, people would take, like for example, you'd have maybe a manual that that's back to trade secrets that contain anybody who saw Coming to America. You remember that was a parody, and it was McDowell's, and you saw the symbol that they had, which was not quite the golden arches, but you know, it was similar. And they had a sandwich called the Big Mick instead of the Big Mac. And that the way that the owner was is they had a manual that was a McDonald's manual. And if you remember when Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall first showed up, and he saw them, he says, "You're not from Big McDonald's, are you?" Because they were they would be coming to investigate. Well, anyway, it was showing an example of how you could do that. There was a trademark lawsuit about a restaurant that was down in let's see, what town? Charleston, near Charleston. Okay, that's where Eastern Illinois University is. My daughter went there. But some people don't know this, by the way. Eastern Illinois University is where Jimmy John's initiated from a project, but that's a little diversion. But across the road of the expressway, which was I-57, um, there was a restaurant called The Burger King. That was the name of it, The Burger King. And Burger King sued, or the owners of Burger King sued to have an injunction issued to make them change that name because they couldn't use it because it would confuse the public. So that was a violation of their trademarks, okay, their trade name and that kind of thing. So now we conclude dealing with copyrights. So when I was an attorney and I represented entertainers, I used to um, do the copyrights for my clients, and it was a document I filled out, and we wrote the songs, the words, the lyrics, and the actual recordings. And so this was before we had digital stuff. So now we have video recordings and computer software added. So the Digital Millennium Copyright Act came about and attempts to address the new copyright issues with the addition of the internet. And so it's important for you to have someone who is familiar with the copyright laws. Now, there was a process that people called the poor man's copyright. And the way it would work is that you would take your book, or you take um, your letter, your song, the lyrics, your poem, and you would put it in a envelope, seal it, and send it to yourself by certified mail, but you wouldn't open it when you got it. And that was what they call the poor man's copyright. But it doesn't work very well. Trust me, I know. And there are lawsuits that take place with lyrics and the use of the songs and certain portions of the music even, uh, excuse me, involving entertainers like Michael Jackson, the Jacksons, and other famous groups. You've heard of some issue about what's the guy's name? I can't think of his name now. He did Uptown. Anyway, I can't think of his name, but you know who I'm talking about, where it was alleged that some of his lyrics came from other songs. And so this is just some of the sources here that you can learn. But it's very important for you to have an attorney, to be honest, who's familiar with these areas to be able to handle them and protect it. Because when you get into litigation, people who got a lot of money can win out. Okay. And that's it for this particular uh, chapter in our week here, week 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a key phrase. And the key phrase is based on something that is very interesting, based on your assignments that you have, and that is eminent domain. Give me eminent domain so you can get your points. All right? Give me eminent domain and you can get your points. So now, as a courtesy to help you out, I'm going to go now. Those of you who want to continue listening after this, I'm going to touch on week number 6, since we have a short week. So this will give you a little bit of edge. Okay. So you have your discussion assignment dealing with SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates stock. Okay. So you're going to, in your initial post, select one or two laws relating to what's found on the Securities Exchange Commission website. There it is right there. If you click on that, and summarize the laws and explain why you think they might change. In your reply post, respond to another student's. And then you should be aware that that discussion post is due, same thing, initial, Tuesday, next Tuesday. And then your reply post will be due Friday, that Friday, as opposed to Saturday. Okay. Your assignment, written assignment, the final one that you'll have, use this scenario. And this is a PowerPoint presentation. Make sure you include speaker notes. We went over this with the first week's assignment, okay? And it must be Microsoft PowerPoint. And on each slide, explain the details of your presentation. Now, this is what should be included. Pay close attention. Some of you missed this during week 1. You have a title slide, an introduction with an overview of the purpose of the presentation. Okay? And then 3 to 5 slides identify at least 2 laws that impact business. Okay? Such as the U.S. Department of Labor website where you can get it, EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the Small Business Administration. Please cite the sources in the body of the PowerPoint or in the notes, one or the other. All right. Explain what the laws mean and how they might specifically affect the organization. Again, cite the source or put it in your notes. Provide at least 4 ideas or recommendations for the company to ensure proper current and compliance. And then last but not least, a reference slide. Okay, so there should be 1, 2, and there should be 3 to 5 more slides and a reference slide. So let's do the max that it says here. So you'd have 1, 2, 5 would be 8, and this would be 9. Okay. So make sure that it's in-text citations. There it is, and references, because you have to have a reference. And like I said again, it is important that you include speaker notes in the pane on each slide to explain the details of your presentation. Now, the title slide, you don't have to. All right. But that goes to the introduction. You can put that in without it. But these 3 to 5 slides, I am going to look for the notes, and you will be graded by that. Okay? Make sure that you get that. And then here is the rubric again. Excuse me. And it is same thing we talked about with week 5. And you want to make sure that you have this information all taken care of. Make sure you have those notes in there. Okay, and that you've properly followed the module and the rubric to get mastery. All right. That assignment is due on the last day of class, which is the 18th, which is a week from Friday. Okay. Okay, so these topics we'll talk about next week. I'll reserve talking about government regulations, comedy, and then each of these for the actual lecture I do next week. But again, I will not go back over the assignments for week, so that it'll be a shorter lecture that we cover for week 6. And you'll get your key phrase at that time. All right. But I've given you what the assignments are for week 6 and how to get them done. Any questions, feel free to reach out to me. All right. So with that, I'm going to say good night to each of you. I'll see you next week on next Wednesday for the final lecture. And enjoy the rest of your week. Get those assignments in and stay safe. Good night.